The toast, in front of 67 people, in the garden illuminated by festive lights and clinking glasses, my father raised his wineglass and smiled proudly at my younger brother, Ryan. "This one," he said, in that firm voice that always filled the room, "is the son who carried the family. The true example of dedication and success." Laughter, applause, a chorus of toasts. And there I was, sitting a few feet away, with the same smile as always, the one I learned to use to keep quiet. The light night wind swayed the lights strung on the trees, and for a second, everything seemed in slow motion. My mother discreetly wiping away a tear of emotion, my brother hugging his father, the guests filming with their cell phones. And me, the forgotten daughter, who paid half the household bills while Ryan invested in his dreams. No one looked at me. No one ever looked. My name is Emily Carter. I'm 34 years old and live in Chicago. I'm a senior accountant at an audit firm. I'm not rich, but I'm stable, and for years, that stability was my family's lifeline. I paid the mortgage when my father lost his job in 2016, covered Ryan's college tuition, and even paid for my mother's car repairs. All in silence. And yet, in that garden, I was introduced to the world as a supporting actor. That night was my parents' wedding anniversary dinner, 35 years together. A celebration in the backyard of our old house in Naperville, a suburb of Chicago. They invited practically the entire neighborhood, aunts, uncles, cousins, church friends. I arrived early, helped with the decorations, set the tables, and arranged the flowers. But when the night began, it was as if I'd disappeared into the midst of the party I'd helped organize. Ryan showed up in an expensive suit, the same one I'd bought him 2 years earlier when he got his first job. He arrived hugging everyone, with that charming smile that always melted my father's heart. "My boy," he'd say. "My pride and joy." He was always the boy. Even at 30, he was still the center of the house. When my father finished his toast, he looked around, raised his glass, and added, "Some of us are born to bring shine to our families. Others, well, others just do what we can." There was laughter. Soft, embarrassed laughter, but real. I felt the blood rush to my face. No one needed translation. I was the other. I stared at the table, trying to hide the trembling in my hands. I remembered every check I'd sent, every time I'd given up my vacation to cover their debt, every late night reviewing spreadsheets to make sure their rent wasn't late. All of it, to be a footnote to my brother's story. What hurt most wasn't the sentence, it was the silence that followed. 67 people heard it, and not one of them said anything. No disapproving looks. No attempt to soften the blow. Just the sound of glasses clinking and someone shouting, "Cheers." I stood up slowly. I didn't slam my glass, I didn't cry, I didn't argue. I just left the cup on the table and walked to the gate. The sound of laughter faded, muffled by my own heartbeat. When I got into the car, I sat in silence for a few minutes. I didn't cry. I just took deep breaths. It was as if something inside me, something old and heavy, had finally cracked. And I knew, with frightening clarity, that had been the last time I would set foot in that house as a daughter. Invisible accounts. The next morning, I woke up with a dry throat and a clouded mind. The Chicago sun streamed through my apartment's blinds. And my phone vibrated on the table with unread messages. My mother, "Your father didn't mean to offend, you know how he is." My brother, "You're exaggerating. It was just a joke." None of them asked if I was okay. None of them said, "Thank you." I grabbed my laptop and opened my spreadsheets, an automatic reflex. I always organized everything with numbers, bills, loans, payments. It was my way of controlling the chaos. But that day, the numbers tasted bitter. There were the monthly transfers, $1,200 for my parents' mortgage, $300 for my mother's credit card, $850 for Ryan's car insurance. Each cell in the spreadsheet was an invisible testament to a love that had never been acknowledged. As the coffee brewed, I reread every line. Since 2014, more than $126,000 had been taken out of my account to cover family expenses. Not once did anyone offer to pay me back. Not once did anyone ask me if I could. I just did it. Because it was the right thing to do. Because someone needed it, but that morning, looking at the numbers, something changed. It no longer felt like love. It felt like debt, and not in the financial sense. It was an emotional debt they had imposed on me, as if my worth were measured by my ability to solve problems. I wasn't a daughter. I was the family's emergency system, the sound of the coffee machine mixed with the din of cars outside, and for a moment, I felt like shutting everything off. Turning off my phone, my laptop, the whole world. I wanted silence. The kind of silence that comes when you decide you're no longer going to fix what others break. I grabbed my phone and opened the banking app. I canceled the automatic mortgage transfer. Then my mom's additional card. Finally, Ryan's insurance payment. 3 taps. 3 clean cuts. My phone vibrated almost immediately, a call from my father. I didn't answer. I knew what was coming, justifications, minimizations, that patronizing tone he always used when I dared to question something. You need to understand the context, Emily, he would say. But the context, this time, was simple. I'm tired of being the invisible pillar of the house. That afternoon, I sat on the couch and stared out the window. For the first time in years, my head wasn't full of lists and to-dos. There was only silence. And in that silence, a question began to emerge. If I disappeared tomorrow, would they notice my absence? Or just the end of the money? I grabbed a piece of paper and started writing. Not a hate letter, but an inventory. A cold, precise list of every penny I'd given over the past 9 years. Not to rub it in, but to remind myself that no, I wasn't crazy. I'd given everything. And they still thought I'd never helped. At the end of the list, I wrote a single sentence. Today, I closed the accounts, and the doors. Then I rested my head on the back of the sofa. Looked at the ceiling and whispered to myself, it's time to change the locks. The sound of the doorbell. 2 days after I canceled all the transfers, the doorbell echoed through my apartment like thunder. It was Sunday, almost noon, and I was finishing washing the dishes when I heard the ring. It wasn't a hurried, desperate ring. It was calm. Insistent. Like someone who knows they'll be answered. When I looked through the peephole, I saw what I expected. My mother, wearing the same beige coat she wore on every visit that began with, "Can we talk?" Beside her, Ryan, his face impassive, hands in his pockets, the look on his face as if he'd come to settle a debt, not apologize. I opened the door slowly, keeping my body against the frame. Not out of fear, but out of instinct. This apartment was the only space that truly belonged to me, and I wouldn't let the past cross the threshold without permission. "Emily, dear." My mother began, her tone mixing guilt and control, a rehearsed tone, almost too maternal to be sincere. "Your father was devastated by the misunderstanding. You know how he is. He doesn't think before he speaks." Misunderstanding. The word hovered in the air like a pesky mosquito. Misunderstanding was when you bumped into someone on the street. Not when you humiliated your daughter in public and erased years of sacrifice. I didn't come to argue, Mom. My voice was cold and controlled. But if you came to talk about dinner, there's nothing to clarify. I understood perfectly what he meant. Ryan stepped forward, that arrogant half-smile, the same one he wore when he received a compliment in front of everyone. "You're being dramatic, Em. Dad didn't mean anything like that. You know, sometimes you take things so personally." I almost laughed. Almost. But I held it back. Personal? "Ryan," he said, "I never did anything for the family. You think paying 9 years of bills is personal?" The silence that followed was uncomfortable. My mother looked away, fixing her eyes on some imaginary spot on the floor. Ryan sighed and tried to change his tone. "Look, what's done is done. We just need to take care of some practical matters. The bills haven't been paid this month. The bank called about the mortgage." Ah, there it was. The real reason. It wasn't regret, it was logistics. "It always was, I know," I replied. "And they won't be." Ryan's expression changed. A flicker of irritation appeared, quick and sharp. "What do you mean, they won't be?" What's gotten into you? It's over, I thought. As if the simple act of saying, enough, were a disorder, a moral failing. I took a deep breath and calmly replied, nothing happened to me. I just decided I'm not going to support adults who pretend I don't exist anymore. My mother tried to smile, the kind of smile she used to calm neighbors during family fights. You've always been so responsible, dear. No need to make a fuss. Let's work this out like adults. Adults? I repeated, more to myself than to her. Being an adult, Mom, means paying your own bills. And maybe learning not to humiliate the person who did it for you. Her face hardened. There was no sweetness left. You've always been ungrateful, Emily. Your brother was trying to. Say no more, I interrupted. Not today. Today you're going to go home and think. And when you realize the house is cold, the lights aren't on, and the heating isn't working, maybe you'll understand what it's like to live without what I gave you in silence for years. I closed the door. I didn't knock. I just closed it. The sound of the latch echoed inside me like a seal, and for the first time, I understood, closing the door wasn't the end. It was the beginning. The post, that night, I couldn't sleep. It wasn't guilt, it was clarity. A clarity that hurt, but freed. I sat on the edge of my bed, laptop open, and stared at the blank screen. For years, I'd used spreadsheets and email as work tools. Now, I'd use them as weapons. I opened a new spreadsheet. Line by line, I recorded everything, every transfer, every purchase, every temporary loan that was never repaid. The final total exceeded $137,800. A number so large it seemed like fiction. And every penny had a story. Ryan's prom dress. Paid for with the card I was still paying off, roof repair after the storm, my parents' anniversary trip to Florida, the one they swore they won in a raffle. When I was done, I saved the file with a simple name, truth.xlsx, and then, without hesitation, I opened the Facebook. For almost an hour, I stared at the empty text field. I didn't want revenge. I wanted memory. I wanted the truth to have a place outside my head. I started typing. For 9 years, I paid the bills of a family who, in front of 67 people, told me I never helped them. I don't write this out of anger. I write it because silence is sometimes the accomplice of lies. I added a simple photo to the post, a broken wine glass on the table. No names, no markings, no visual drama. Just a symbolic image, and then I attached the file. The final text said, here's what I never did. Every payment, every receipt, every forgotten loan. If help is invisible, then let the truth at least have color. I clicked publish. The clock read 11:47 at night. I left my laptop on the table, went to the window, and looked out at the sleeping city. Lights flashing, distant horns honking, and for the first time, I felt something I didn't immediately recognize. It took a few seconds to realize the name of it, peace. Truth needs no witnesses. I woke up at 6:12 a.m. to the insistent sound of my phone notifications. For a moment, I thought it was my alarm, but what really rang through me was the weight of the repercussions. The post had spread like wildfire. Hundreds of likes, dozens of comments, and a string of private messages that began with, I went through this too. I scrolled slowly. Some relatives had commented with embarrassed emojis, others in complete silence. My father's name didn't appear, but Ryan's. Yes. There he was, with the same ironic tone he always used when he wanted to belittle me without seeming cruel. I can't believe you took things to this point. Family is supposed to be handled at home. Not online. I stared at that sentence for long seconds. It was funny, for years, he and my parents had turned our house into a silent courtroom where I was always the defendant, and now they were complaining that the audience was watching the proceedings. The reaction from strangers was different. People I didn't even know started sharing the post with captions like some silences are costly and the truth sets you free, but first it destroys. And me? I just watched. There was no pleasure, no regret. Just a feeling that finally, after so many years, reality had found its own voice. My phone rang. Dad flashed on the screen. I took a deep breath and answered, Emily. His voice was restrained, but with that edge of authority he never lost. What have you done? Do you want to shame your own family? No, Dad, I replied calmly. I just wanted to clarify what you deleted in front of 67 people. He sighed. You're hurt. I understand. But you need to remember everything we did for you too. Everything we did. The phrase echoed in my head like cruel irony. For a second, I considered asking what exactly he thought he'd done. But I stopped. I didn't want to discuss memories anymore with someone who constantly rewrote them. Father, if you don't remember, it's not up to me to remember for you. There was silence on the other end. Then he said something that sounded more like a threat than advice. When people find out what you did, there will be no one left on your side. There wasn't any left before, I replied. The difference is that now I realized. And I hung up. The phone felt heavy in my hands. But the silence that followed wasn't empty, it was solid. It was the kind of silence that comes when someone finally closes a door and knows it no longer needs to be opened. The house without a key. On Wednesday, 3 days after the post, I decided to drive to my parents' old house. Not to argue, I'd already said everything I needed to. I just wanted to see it. To see the place I'd kept standing for almost a decade, now without my money holding up the walls. The drive to Naperville was familiar, a mix of suburban streets and memories that seemed to replay like an old movie. When I parked in front of the house, I noticed the lawn was drier than usual, and the porch light was off. The sound of cars in the distance seemed strange, as if even the neighborhood had learned to be silent. Knock on the door. For a moment, I thought no one would answer. But then I heard slow footsteps, and the doorknob turned. It was my mother. Her face looked smaller, older. Her eyes were empty. Emily. You shouldn't be here. I just came to get some of my things, I lied. There was nothing of mine there. I just wanted to look her in the eye without having to ask permission. She crossed her arms, hesitated. Your father is very hurt. You exposed the family. Now everyone is talking. Your uncle called yesterday, your aunt posted indirect messages. You destroyed the peace in the house. Me? I replied. Or you, when you erased me in front of everyone? She looked away. You need to learn to forgive. I took a deep breath, feeling the lump rise in my throat. Mom, I've forgiven so many times. When Dad said Ryan had potential, and I only had responsibility. When you asked me to pay the bills and called it temporary help. When they left me alone in the hospital after surgery because Ryan had a work event. I've forgiven so much that forgiveness became anesthesia. But now, it's over, she tried to interrupt, but I didn't give her space. You taught me that love was paying the price and smiling in the end. But now I've learned that love without respect is a debt, and a debt is not affection. A metallic sound broke the silence, the rattle of the bunch of keys I took from my pocket, and before she understood, I said, oh, and by the way. I handed over the old key to the house, the same one I had carried for 9 years. You can have this. I changed the locks on my apartment. From now on, only those who see me as a person, not as a source of income, are allowed in. Her face paled. Emily, don't do this. Family is all we have. No, Mom. Family is what we build, not what we survive. I left without looking back. When I got into the car and closed the door, I looked in the rearview mirror and saw her silhouette standing in the driveway, small. Lost. Like someone who finally realized that the daughter who always kept the lights on no longer lives there. When the truth is uncomfortable, on Friday morning, my phone started vibrating again. I knew what was coming, the second act of the family tragedy. This time, it was the Henderson Family Forever Facebook group. The same place where everyone posted smiling photos and quotes about togetherness, even if no one could stand each other outside of the captions. The top of the feed displayed a new post, Ryan, with an old photo of us, he and I as teenagers, smiling at a family picnic. The caption, even when someone walks away, brotherly love remains. Some of us just need more time to heal. The likes poured in. The comments were predictable. You're so mature, Ryan. Families fight. But love always wins. Pray for your sister. I took a deep breath. It was a performance. He had turned the story into a stage, and now he presented himself as the patient victim, the compassionate brother who suffered in silence. But what struck me most wasn't the deceit. It was the fact that no one, absolutely no one, asked why I did what I did. People don't want to understand. They want to choose a side that makes them look good. At the office, messages began to arrive. Co-workers, some sympathetic, others overly curious. Emily, I saw your brother's post. I hope you're okay. Is all this really true? Family is complicated, right? What no one understands is that when you finally speak up, the world calls you cruel, but when you keep quiet, they call you ungrateful. Either way, you lose. At the end of the workday, I received an email from my boss. The subject line read, Public Conduct Verification. I opened it and felt my stomach turn. It read, We understand that family matters are sensitive, but we ask for discretion. Your name is circulating on social media and could affect the company's image. I smiled in disbelief. 9 years of punctuality, impeccable reports, exceeded goals, and what had threatened my reputation was now a truth spoken out loud. I closed my laptop and looked out the window. Outside, the Chicago sky was gray and heavy. A tone that seemed perfect for that moment. I realized that sometimes freedom comes with noise, the noise of people trying to put you back in the box of convenience. But I wouldn't go back, even if the price was everyone's silence. The price of freedom. The following Sunday, the phone rang again. It was Chloe, my cousin, the only one who ever really listened to me. Did you see the video? What video? I asked, my stomach already tightening. She hesitated. Your brother posted a sort of rant. He said you're struggling with old traumas and that he forgives you anyway. Everyone's sharing it. I felt my heart race. I went to the computer and opened the link. There he was, Ryan, sitting on my parents' couch. Looking straight into the camera, the calm, rehearsed voice, family is hard. Sometimes a person carries hurt feelings and thinks money can replace love. I never wanted things to get to this point. I just want my sister to know that, despite everything, I forgive her. I forgive. The word hit me like a slap. He forgave me, after years of using me, lying, and erasing me. Now, in the court of the internet, he became the saint, and I the resentful monster. I stared at the screen, trying to understand why it still hurt. I already knew who he was. I expected manipulation. But what hurt me was the echo of the old pattern, the story always told by the loudest speaker, with each comment that appeared, Ryan. You're so mature / I hope your sister finds peace. A part of me wanted to scream, to respond, to prove it, but I didn't do anything, because I realized something important. You don't win a lie by competing for applause. I closed the video and put the laptop aside. The apartment was silent, just the sound of the clock ticking. I looked at the plant cradle my grandmother had given me before she died. She said, freedom is like a root, it grows in the dark before it appears in the light. That night I sat on the floor and cried, not of regret, but of relief. For the first time, I cried for myself. The next day, I deleted all social media, not because I was scared, but because I didn't need anyone to see anymore. The truth had already been told, and what the world did to her was no longer my problem. When someone sees without you asking, 3 weeks have passed since Ryan's video. The noise on the internet has subsided. Like every storm, that public attention turns to dust. I walked in silence, a silence so absolute that it sometimes frightened me. But it was a new kind of stillness, the kind that comes when you stop justifying your own existence. One Wednesday afternoon, my corporate email pinged. The sender was Michael Torres, a colleague who had left the company 2 years earlier. The subject line simply said, I saw the video. And I remembered. I opened the message with a heavy heart. Emily, I don't know if you remember, but in 2017, when you were covering the branch's reimbursement project, I heard your father calling you every day asking for money. You hung up, took a deep breath, and went back to work as if nothing had happened. I didn't know what to say at the time, but now I know that what you did wasn't obligation, it was love, and sometimes, the truest love is the one that stops before killing you. I stared at the screen for a while. The words seemed simple, but they hit me like an anchor. For the first time in months, someone had seen, not the role I played, but the weight I carried. I replied with just one line, thanks for remembering. That night, I left work late and stopped by a cafe downtown. The scent of cinnamon reminded me of childhood, of the few moments when home felt like a shelter. I sat alone, ordered a cappuccino, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel out of place. I didn't have all the answers yet, but I've realized that sometimes healing begins when someone sees your pain and doesn't try to fix it, they just acknowledge it's there. The final confrontation. It was a cold Saturday morning when I heard the doorbell again. This time, I knew. The kind of touch that was slow, spaced, and filled with intention. I opened the door, and there he was, my father. Time had passed, but he looked the same, rigid posture, stern gaze, the expression of someone who believed he still controlled the script. But there was something new, a hesitation that hadn't existed before. "Can I come in?" he asked. It took me a few seconds before I responded, "It depends. Did you come as a father or as a collector?" He looked down for a moment. "As a father." I let him in. The air inside the apartment felt colder. He walked to the sofa and sat down, looking around, as if he were surveying the space of a life he had never known. "Emily." I saw everything that happened. The post, the comments, the people. I didn't want it to come to this. But it arrived. I replied. He nodded. "If I could go back, would have said something different that night. But you have to understand that parents sometimes make mistakes trying to protect." Protect, the word made me laugh, a bitter, dry laugh. Protect who, Dad? Ryan? Or your pride in admitting that I was the one holding everything together while you pretended stability? He took a deep, tired breath. "I just wanted peace." Peace is not about erasing others. I replied. There was a heavy silence, and then he took something out of his pocket, an old silver key. "It's from the old house. We're selling it. I thought you might want a souvenir." I looked at the object for long seconds. It was symbolic. That key that for years unlocked the door to my silent servitude. I picked it up, looked at it, and said in a firm voice, "No. You can stay. It's the reminder of everything I closed and never want to open again." He looked like he wanted to say something, but he decided against it. He stood up slowly, as if the weight of the years had finally become physical. Before leaving, he muttered, "Ryan is going to have a baby." "Good for him," I replied. "Don't you want to see?" "No. I've seen enough spoiled children raised to think that love is applause." He said nothing. He opened the door and walked out. This time, I was the one who locked it. 2 turns of the lock, firm, definitive, and as the sound of the latch echoed, I realized, the key to my peace was never in their hands. It was always in mine. The sound of beginning again. Winter arrived slowly. The bare trees on the street where I lived looked like skeletons against the gray sky, and people walked hurriedly, hidden in heavy coats. But inside me, something was beginning to warm. It wasn't happiness. It was presence. After years of living as a shadow, I finally inhabited my own body. I started working fewer hours, something that would have been unthinkable before. I started frequenting a small bookstore downtown, where the owner, a gentleman named Howard, always had a cup of tea waiting for me when I arrived. He never asked any questions, and perhaps that was what kept me coming back. In silence, I allowed myself to exist without being useful. One afternoon, while leafing through a Maya Angelou book, he said, "You look like someone who learned to rebuild himself without a manual." Smile, or someone who finally understood that they no longer need to fix others. I started walking in the park on Sunday mornings. The cold air hitting my face reminded me of everything I'd endured, but now weightless. She carried a hot coffee and a list of small plans: learn photography, travel alone, adopt a cat, simple things, but they had the taste of freedom. One of those mornings, I met a woman with a baby in her arms. The boy smiled at everything. She looked at me and said, "Do you have children?" I shook my head. "No. But for a long time I raised adults as if they were." She laughed without understanding the depth, but I smiled back, because for once, the answer didn't come with pain. When I returned home that day, the apartment seemed bigger, maybe because, after all, it wasn't a shelter, it was a home, and there, in the midst of the silence, I realized, sometimes, starting over doesn't get applause. There is only peace, and that's enough. When the past asks for shelter. It was a rainy Friday when the past returned, wet, exhausted, and uninvited. The doorbell rang 3 times. I thought about ignoring it, but something made me get up. When I opened the door, I almost didn't recognize Ryan. His face was drawn, his gaze lost. Behind, an old car with boxes stacked up and a woman in the passenger seat, visibly pregnant. He tried to smile, but his voice cracked. Can I come in? I didn't answer. I just watched. Time is cruel to those who never learn. The man in front of me was not the arrogant brother of my youth. He was someone who had finally discovered what it was like to have nowhere to go. I lost my job. And my house. Mom and Dad went to Aunt Margaret's house. They can't help me. I don't know what to do. The words came out broken, as if each syllable weighed heavily. He looked around, expecting the same gesture as always, the automatic forgiveness. The shelter I always offered, but this time, the script was different. I took a deep breath and replied, Ryan, you always told me that family is where we find unconditional love. So, find yours. I found mine. In me. He stood still, trying to comprehend. The woman beside him wept silently. For a moment, I thought about giving in, but I remembered all the nights I cried alone while they slept peacefully, sustained by my sacrifice. I stepped forward, held out an umbrella and said, take it. It's going to rain harder. But you can't stay here. His gaze was a mixture of anger and regret. You've changed. No, Ryan. I just stopped being who you needed to be so you could keep making mistakes. I closed the door slowly, the sound of rain mixed with the echo of the past outside, and for the first time, I realized that true forgiveness isn't about opening the door again, is being able to close it without guilt. The last request, the news arrived in a short, unadorned connection, like someone delivering an old telegram. My mother had fallen in the kitchen. It wasn't serious, they said, but enough to break the iron routine she had built around her own pride. I remained silent for a few seconds, listening to Aunt Margaret's weary breathing on the other end, who had always been adept at saying things without saying anything. If you could, come by. It was an invitation with an air of demand, as if the subtext contained a memory of all the times I'd stopped by without being asked. I went. Not out of duty. Not out of guilt. I went because, after all this, I wanted to see for myself what was left of what we once called family. My aunt's apartment was on the third floor of an old building, a narrow hallway, smelling of soup and disinfectant mixed together. I knocked twice. The door opened slowly. It was my aunt, not my mother, who greeted me. She was on the couch, legs covered by a plaid blanket, hair tied back, wearing the same beige coat she'd worn at the barbecue, and somehow, it seemed smaller. Beside her was a half-empty glass of water and 2 pills still in the blister pack. Hi, Emily, she said, as if it were a practiced greeting. I responded with a slight wave and sat in the chair opposite, the one that creaks when someone shifts. No one talked about the fall. No one talked about the post. No one talked about the dinner with the 67 people. The room was a graveyard of conversations that never happened. After a few seconds, my mother lifted her chin. Do you know how to cook that potato soup? She asked, as if testing the strength of my new figure. Yes, I replied. And I went to the kitchen. As I washed the potatoes in the narrow sink, I heard the creak of the chair and the light shuffle of her footsteps down the hallway. I didn't need to look to know she was there, observing the scene like someone peering through a window into a past that never returns. Emily, she said, her voice low, as if she no longer has a stage. I shouldn't have said what I said. The sentence hung in the air. It didn't offer a complete apology, nor an acknowledgement of the damage. It was the most she could offer. I took a deep breath, letting the water run through my fingers. I know, I replied, without turning her over. But knowing doesn't fix it. I heard a sigh, the slow sound of her footsteps returning, and for a moment I felt compassion, not for what she'd done, but for her inability to be anything else. The soup went on the stove, and as I stirred, I noticed my own reflection in the stainless steel lid, me, an adult, making a small gesture that seemed enormous inside that house. It wasn't surrender. It was a boundary with humanity. I carried the bowl into the living room, placed it on the coffee table, and sat down. She took 2 spoonfuls slowly. Thank you, she said. A short, belated word, but nonetheless, it carried weight. We returned to silence. The TV was on low, a morning show showing smiling couples in a pristine setting. It seemed cruel. "Your aunt said you changed the locks." I nodded. "I did." She stared at her hand for a few seconds, the fine veins, the clear skin. "You did good," she murmured. I hadn't expected to hear that. I froze in my chair, like someone who finds a key they didn't even know they were looking for. She took another deep breath and finally said what she might never have dared say. "I was afraid. Afraid to admit that we depended on you. Afraid to admit that your brother wasn't what I screamed he was. And afraid to lose the little bit of control that kept me awake." Her sincerity didn't come as tears. It came raw, unvarnished, almost clinical. "I can't fix the past, Mom," I replied. "But I can't repeat it." Before I left a pot of extra soup in the fridge and a simple note: "Tomorrow, heat on low heat." She didn't ask me to stay. I didn't offer. At the door, Aunt Margaret took my arm and said, "Thank you for coming." I just smiled slightly. In the elevator, alone, I understood that sometimes the last request isn't forgiveness. It's just some soup, and the dignity of leaving when the door opens. Breaking the script, my father's message arrived days later. At an indecipherable time, like everything he did when he wanted to appear casual. "We need to talk," it said, without a greeting, without a signature, as if authority resided in the imperative. I didn't respond right away. I closed my phone, made coffee, opened the windows. I let the cold air in, like someone airing out the house before dealing with old mold. Only then did I type, "Today, at 6 p.m., at the cafe on the corner." 30 minutes, at 6 p.m. sharp, he was already there. A glass of water, no order, his gaze scanning the room. I sat across from him, left my bag on my lap, and folded my hands. He began without preamble, "Your mother told me you stopped by." I just nodded. She was pleased. I was tempted to say that contentment isn't the same as regret, but I let the sentence get lost in the noise of the espresso machine in the background. He took a deep breath and pulled a brown envelope from his briefcase. He pushed it across the table. "These are the house papers. The sale has been approved. There's not much left." I opened the envelope, flipped through 2 pages, cold numbers. He continued, "The truth is, without your help, we sank. And I'm not here to ask you to come back. I'm here to acknowledge that I constructed the wrong narrative." I remained silent. Not to make him speak, but because that sentence deserved space to exist. He continued, "I wanted a son who would make me proud in his loudness. And you were always a silent pride." I ignored it. There was a rough honesty in his voice, like sandpaper on an old surface. "And Ryan?" I asked finally. He looked down. "He's going to be a father. And he still doesn't know how to be a man." The waitress brought my coffee. I held the cup with both hands, as if holding an object warm from within. "What do you want, Dad?" I finally asked. He took his time choosing his words, as if his tongue was unpracticed in humility. "I want you to know that, if I could go back to that night, I would have said something different. And I want you to no longer carry anything that doesn't belong to you." The request wasn't forgiveness. It was a belated permission to be who I'd already decided to be. Still, it had value. "Thank you for saying that," I replied, without melodrama. "I've already learned how to walk." He nodded. "I know. And that's why I came." He pulled something else out of his pocket, an old keychain, the kind you buy at a gas station, with a metal compass-shaped keychain. "I bought it when you were 12, on that trip to Wisconsin. I was going to give it to you at the end of the week, but Ryan lost the championship and I forgot." He placed the keychain on the table between us. "So you don't forget to follow your own north." I took the keychain, not as if accepting a gift, but as if retrieving a piece of myself trapped in a distant summer. "I'm not coming back, Dad," I said, without harshness. "I'm not asking for that either," he replied, slowly standing up. I just promise that if anyone ever asks me who kept everything together, I'll say your name. Out loud. He left without a hug. I stood there for a few more minutes, looking out the window at the people rushing by, the bus passing by, the sky turning violet. I put my keychain in my bag, paid the bill, and left. Outside, the wind had changed. It was the same cold, but it felt different. As I walked back home, I understood definitively. Breaking the script isn't rewriting your childhood, it's preventing it from writing the rest of your life. The house with new keys. The following weeks passed in silence, but a different silence. Not the heavy emptiness of before, but the kind of stillness that comes when you finally have peace. The sound that had once kept me company, the constant hum of guilt, was now gone. The apartment felt different, even though it was the same. Perhaps because, for the first time, it truly belonged to me. Every object was exactly where I wanted it to be, and none of them carried the shadow of an unpaid favor. One afternoon, the keychain my father had given me, the small silver compass, lay on the table next to the new door keys. I stared at them for a while. Two simple pieces of metal, but with the symbolic weight of a lifetime. One locked the past, the other unlocked what was yet to come. I took the keychain and attached it to the new keys. They made a soft, almost musical sound. It was the most liberating sound I had ever heard. I looked around. The afternoon sun filtered through the curtains and fell on the sofa, a reminder that even light finds cracks to enter. The kettle whistled in the kitchen. The smell of fresh coffee filled the air. No phones rang, no one called for help. It was strange. And beautiful. The absence of requests seemed miraculous. While the coffee brewed, I opened my laptop and began writing. Not an email, not a spreadsheet. Just a simple text, with no intended recipient. I wrote what I'd learned, that love without respect is a debt. That silence can be complicit, and that sometimes, the courage to close a door is the first step toward finding yourself again. I didn't know if I'd ever share that text with anyone, but in that moment, it was my confession and my liberation. I grabbed my cup and went out onto the balcony. The sky was orange, punctuated by birds lining up. People passed below, couples, friends, mothers with children, and for a second, I felt like I was part of the world again, without having to carry anyone's weight to exist in it. A light wind blew, and for the first time in years, I smiled for no reason. The phone vibrated. It was a short message, from a number I hadn't saved. Just 2 words, "We are fine." No name, no request. I smiled. I deleted the message without replying. Some stories don't need an epilogue, just distance. I stepped back inside and, almost instinctively, went to the door. I touched the cold metal of the new lock. That was my border. No resentment, just a clear boundary between what I was and what I decided to be. I took a deep breath and thought, I don't want revenge, I want peace, and finally, I have it. I sat on the couch, closed my eyes, and let the sounds of the city wash over me. Every horn, every footstep, every life carried on, and now, mine, too. I grabbed the remote, flipped to the video channel, and watched the intro to the next story, which began with a calm voice saying, "Welcome back to Family Ashes, where silence finds voice. And wounds become strength." I smiled again, this time with gratitude. Because telling my story wasn't about revenge, it was about releasing the burden. And if someone, somewhere, hears it and feels the same relief I feel now, then it was all worth it. And you, if you were in my place, would you forgive? Tell us in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel, activate the bell and leave your like. Because here, every day, there is a new story that shows that the end can be the beginning, if you have the courage to close the right door. Candle.